Thank you. I want to thank Jody for inviting me to this event. It's always appreciative to see folks take the seriousness of preparedness by showing up to these events. So, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. By the way, it's Willey, not Wiley, but I've gone through that all my life. I'm a 25-year veteran of the fire service, joined in 1985. I've worked my way up through the ranks. I just retired recently. Retired in the sense that I'm no longer active duty on a fire engine. I do still teach. I do still work with the fire service. The one thing I've learned about it is you really can't retire from that. But I retired at the rank of captain, and I'm a life member of the Fair Oaks Volunteer Fire and Rescue Company. I've been on Virginia Task Force 1 since its inception in 1985, when it first became a FEMA recognized team. Been on 10 deployments, domestically and internationally. I always like to think that the last deployment I went on would be the worst, and I would never see it any worse than that, but it always seems to get more devastating. And Haiti was no exception to that. When we are deployed domestically, we're called Virginia Task Force 1. We're one of 28 teams in the United States. However, our international moniker is USA SAR Team 1, United States of America Search and Rescue Team 1. We're one of two teams, we share this with Los Angeles County, two teams that could perform duties overseas. So we were one of the first teams anywhere to arrive in Haiti. We actually, Iceland was the team that arrived shortly prior to us there, believe it or not. But we were one of the first teams to get on the ground there in Haiti. To give you a little bit of background about Virginia Task Force 1, it was established in 1986. It is sponsored by the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department. Like I said, it has a partnership with FEMA. It's one of 28 teams domestically that deploy on urban search and rescue events. We also have a partnership with the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. We're one of two teams that can deploy internationally. We share this with Los Angeles County, California, but we're one of 8 teams that gets the designation of heavy rescue through the International Search and Rescue Advisory Group, INSARAG. So, we are over 200 members strong in this. Developing a urban search and rescue team is not something where you just throw your hand up in the air and say, you know, we're a resource, come use us. This took years to develop, and it was a result of the need for technical rescue capabilities in our local jurisdiction. In the late 70s, Fairfax County, and for those of you that don't know Fairfax County, we're a suburb of Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia. We experienced a building boom in the late 70s. A tremendous amount of construction occurred. Both residential construction and high-rise construction occurred. And as a result, we needed to develop those capabilities to do trench collapse, structural collapse, high-angle capabilities because of the tall buildings. And then the metro, the subway system, was also being developed at that time. So we needed a below-grade rescue capability. All of the components that make up urban search and rescue. Now, we were organized, what started off as a trench rescue team, kind of devoted to that, developed into more of a technical rescue operations team. We call it our TROT team, Technical Rescue Operations Team. There we go. One of our first deployments, one of our first big deployments was the Mexico City earthquake. This was an eye-opener for many rescue operations. It's an earthquake, a major earthquake that occurred in 1985. It was the first search and rescue deployment by any organization, and it changed the perception of recovery versus response. In the past, it was always thought that after an earthquake happened, you would deal with some of the problems right away. But after that, it was pretty much, we're going to rebuild, and that's the solution to it. This was a different approach. This was a response type approach. And if you sit for my my class on CERT this afternoon, you'll see that Mexico City was also the groundbreaking event, pardon the pun, for that event. So, Mexico City resulted in, because we had made some headway, we were known throughout the Washington metropolitan area because of our technical rescue capabilities. The folks in Washington, D.C. recognized that and said, hey, we could use your assistance. We want to send some folks down to Mexico City. So we did that. We came back and we had the taste of international blood and international travel in our veins. So, following the Mexico City earthquake, we started establishing some more formal rules and regulations and policies. And in 1988, the former Soviet Armenia was struck with an earthquake, major earthquake in a major metropolitan area. Again, the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, which is part of USAID, sought to get assistance there. This is part of an elaborate diplomatic process, as you can imagine. Even domestically, when the governor requests assistance from a state, that assistance comes in a variety of forms. It may be rescue, it may be financial, it may be in supplies, it may be in a variety of things. So if you change that to an international response, you can imagine that the talks are just the beginning of it. So it's a very complex approach. But OFDA assembled a group of rescuers from Florida, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. It was a group of about 24 people, and then we responded in country for about 11 days with one live rescue in that. Okay. The lessons learned from Armenia, which we went on to take with our establishment of an urban search and rescue team, was that the composition of the size of the team was way too small for the events that we would be dealt. We needed more people, more specialties involved in it. We needed to establish protocols, just a whole host of rules. I hate to say it, but paperwork is part of the process. Okay? Our logistical needs were ill-defined. We took tools and equipment with us based on our knowledge of construction and structural capabilities in the United States. That was not the case in Soviet Armenia. There was a different standard there. We needed different tools. We needed different capabilities. So, and then the ability to integrate with local resources was hampered. This is going to be the case anywhere. We learn this every time. We tweak this a little bit every time. The local resources are going to be overwhelmed, and in Armenia that was no exception. So, the task force is made up of several specialties. The first one is search. The search component consists of a canine component where we do search. We do initial searches with canines. We locate an area. We get some hits with the dogs and decide whether if we don't get hits with the dogs, we may move on, but if we do get a hit with the dogs, we'll come in there and bring more resources to the table. Listening devices, some sensitive listening devices that we can hear tapping or voices, and that's not to say that every tapping noise you hear is a person. It could be dripping water, it could be a piece of metal waving in the wind, tapping up against another piece of metal. This equipment's very, very sensitive, and in fact if you had an area the size of this room and you were to set up the listening devices, somebody simply tapping on this desk up here would be picked up by these devices. So we have to shut down the area of all outside noise sources and allow the search technicians to do their thing. Another component is the search cameras. Basically, this is fiber optics or some other method. This is actually one of the victims in the Haiti earthquake, the first rescue we made at the UN compound. We were able to get a search camera in there, extend the boom out on it. We can do this by either using existing cracks or openings or cutting small holes in the concrete and inserting the camera, and that'll determine, through the use of a trained operator, we can figure out exactly where that person is. So, another component of the team is a rescue component. Obviously, once we've located somebody, now the job has got to come into, we got to get them out somehow. So this is the rock breakers, as we affectionately call them, using chipping equipment, cutting equipment, concrete breaking equipment, intended for hardened buildings, hardened facilities. So once we get in, once we burrow in and make a hole, we'll start expanding that hole big enough so we can get a rescuer in there, start getting medical aid to the person, start digging out more of the area, and then we'll make the rescue. Not cooperating. There we go. Once we get the victims out, once we get the survivors out, they are most likely going to need medical treatment. In a very few instances, they're able to walk away from it, but for the most part, they're going to need medical treatment. The medical component does a couple things. One, they will work on the victim, obviously, the survivor, but they're also there for our assistance should one of us get injured. As you can imagine, as I said earlier, the local resources are going to be overwhelmed, and as a result, anything that happens to us, we're going to need possibly severe care. So we want to have the doctors and paramedics there for us. But then, of course, as somebody is rescued, it's not just a matter of calling 911 or whatever the equivalent number is locally. An ambulance shows up and they're whisked away. They need to be treated, they need to be taken care of until we can turn them over to a capable medical facility, which is sometimes a challenge in itself. This is a case where we're actually stitching up one of the members of the French rescue team here in Haiti. So the medical team works for us as well as for the victims. So we have a technical component. The technical component may consist of structural engineers, heavy equipment and rigging operators, hazardous materials specialists, basically taking any of the communications specialists, taking any of the technical attributes of the rescue work and folding a strategic or tactical approach to it. This is one of the monitoring stations that we did to monitor the stability of a building here. Our heavy equipment operators and specialists will work with a local crane or backhoe operators to use that equipment to assist us in uncovering debris so we can get to the victims. Okay. We've also got a command and general staff, the people who are looking out for us strategically, making the decisions day to day about where we're going to go, what we're going to do, what our focus is going to be on that day. And then last, the unsung heroes of logistics. We go out and break the tools all day long. The next day, our next shift, we come back and the tools are repaired and ready for us to use again. So it's their job to keep that stuff running and operating there. Okay. A little bit about Port-au-Prince. It is a 14.7 square mile area, Port-au-Prince proper. Of course, like many urban areas, it spills off and becomes suburban and then becomes rural. Of course, the earthquake and any other disasters don't really give much regard to jurisdictional boundaries. So the population is about 1 million people. If you do the math, it translates to about 70,000 people per square mile. So very, very dense population there, very heavy population. January 12th, 2010, at about 5 p.m., a 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck. It was 8.1 miles deep, about 15 miles west-southwest of Port-au-Prince. Initially, 200,000 people were predicted killed, 300,000 injured, and over 1 million displaced. So not only the folks in Port-au-Prince, but pretty much everybody around it. And in fact, if you get a chance, USGS, I was looking at the map over by the breakout rooms there, has got this map as well as a lot more detail to that. Pretty fascinating there as to how many events happened there. We experienced one, the aftershocks immediately following the earthquake, and then 3 weeks after that occurred. There was a 6.0 that occurred about 7 minutes after the quake, so just when you think it's over, It's still happening. While we were in Haiti, we experienced a 5.9 that woke us up the morning of the 20th, and then numerous occasions, numerous aftershocks. You would be in a building and feel something start to rumble and either hunker down or run as fast as you can. The response. About 6 p.m., about 6:30 on January the 12th, we had heard the news reports of the earthquake in Haiti, but about an hour and a half after the earthquake, Virginia Task Force 1, or USA 1, received its orders to deploy. This was groundbreaking, pardon the pun again, from the standpoint that we had never received these orders this quick. Often we'll get something like this, we'll hear about an alert, we'll hear about they'll use some other words that mean we really kind of got to get our stuff together and get ready to go, but this one was an hour and a half afterwards, you are being deployed. So this is the fastest deployment decision to date, and that speed is instrumental in the success. As you can imagine, the quicker you can get down there and start getting to the people, the more positive results you'll get. So they did not leave, this initial team did not leave for about 12 hours later, and I'll go into some explanation about that in just a moment. The evening of the next day, of course, we had been watching the news, everybody had been following it and seen that, boy, this is really bad. And of course, the fact is that because Haiti's is close to us, the news seems to come a little bit quicker. And of course, thanks to the internet. But USAID started making requests. We started hearing rumblings. Boy, I've got it with the puns today. We started hearing stories about another team being put together to go down there. This began as a paper exercise, but the talk was that there was going to be a second medium team being deployed. The morning of January 14th, a portion of that team was sent to the warehouse. We were pretty sure at this point we were going down. I was on the second team that went, and as of noon, we got the deployment orders, and we were actually wheels up out of Dulles Airport at about 11 o'clock the evening of the 14th. You'd like to think in these rescue scenarios that you go out to the airport and the turbines are spinning on the aircraft, you hop on and it's wheels up, red lights all the way. It doesn't work that way. Any of you folks here from the federal government know there's procurement processes that have got to happen. In the perfect world, we would fly down there via military transport. We'd get on a big C-5 or C-17. We would take many of our vehicles that already have the equipment cataloged and cached. We take our smaller vehicles, the pickup trucks that we can use and get around town. But right now the military, as we all know, has got a little thing going on in the Middle East, and that focus needs to stay there. So the focus for us needs to be contracted out. And our flight and our transportation was contracted out through private carriers down there. So it's not like you just walk up to the United counter and say, hey, I got 60 of my closest friends here. We want to go down to Haiti. Can you hook us up? So, but we were out there, wheels up at about 11 o'clock on the evening of the 14th. The first team had arrived already. They were there within 24 hours. The second team, the medium team, arrived within 60 hours. We got there at about 3 in the morning, basically waited until daylight. A security contingent arrived, took all of our equipment, and we wound up teaming up with USA 1. And the decision was made early on, instead of having two independent teams operating, we brought those two teams together as one. We called it a super jumbo team. And it consisted of 114 members, 7 dogs, like 80,000 pounds of equipment. So it was a good decision to make that. We were working as one team with much broader capabilities. Understand also that even though the team is designated as a heavy or a medium, everybody, regardless of your position, regardless of your specialty, everybody gets the same training whether you're on a medium team or a heavy team. So everybody's got the same capabilities. It really just depends on what equipment you're taking with you. Going to do a fly-in here. Hopefully this will work. Nope, not going to work. There's a cool little feature that you can do with Google Earth that has you fly into the location, and it doesn't seem to want to work on this setup, but we flew in to the Port-au-Prince airport. One of the unique things about the airport in Port-au-Prince is that it is a single runway airport with no parallel taxiways, and the taxiway to the terminal is about mid-runway. What that means, if you're a pilot, is that you have to bring your aircraft down, you land, you taxi all the way to the end of the runway, turn the aircraft around, taxi halfway back down the runway, and turn off into the taxiway to get to the terminal, okay? Well, if you're trying to bring in a lot of supplies, you've got to wait a long time for the aircraft to clear that runway and get into a safe area. So this made for, when you heard on the news that there were significant problems with the airport at Port-au-Prince, it wasn't because of damage so much. There was some damage there, but it was because just the capabilities of the airport, even before the earthquake, made it very difficult to bring a lot of air traffic in there. What they needed is, and I'm no airport planner, but a parallel taxiway so that the aircraft could just peel off as you got there. Decision was made early on that we would be located on the compound of the U.S. Embassy. There were actually 6 U.S. teams in Haiti. There was us, Los Angeles County, okay? 2 teams from Florida, Florida 1 and Florida 2. Florida 1 used to be the international team. LA beat them out of that position. And then there were 2 other teams, Virginia Beach and New York City, that came down. Too bad for the gals from Virginia Beach and New York City, because they were stuck at the airport. We pretty much used up every available square inch of the embassy compound for our camp, for our base of operations, and they had to be stationed out at the airport, which was a rather arid, dusty, dry, hot. Insert all of the adjectives you like there. So, but our base of operations was the embassy compound. It was a couple miles from the airport, pretty much on the edge of town. The city, like I said, was about 14.7 miles. Even in good times, the road conditions, a lot of badly damaged, poorly maintained roads, or no maintenance whatsoever roads. To get from point to point would take a long time. And this was compounded even more by just the chaos of the event. Intersections would prove to be, it would take you 20 minutes to get through an intersection because it was just a free-for-all. Everybody was trying to work their way through. They drive up on sidewalks. Another thing that happened, and I'll show you a picture of this later, is that with the damaged buildings, people had nowhere to go. The only open area, in many cases, because the city was so built up, was in the street. So what they would do is they would take debris and they would place it along a lane of traffic, and then they would basically take squatters' rights to it. And they would set up a sleeping bag or a tent or whatever. So you would be driving down a 2-lane road, and all of a sudden that 2 lanes would neck down into 1 lane, and you'd have to take turns negotiating through it. So getting from any point in the city was really an arduous task. Okay. Right from the get-go, we were out doing reconnaissance. We received information from the UN on different locations, but some of the sites that we saw pretty early on, this is the National Palace, the President's compound. The damage devastated there, which of course has a tremendous emotional impact when you see your infrastructure. You know what's happened in the event, but then you see the infrastructure, the government that's supposed to keep you operating, and this is what's happened to them. So that doesn't instill a great deal of confidence in there. Did a lot of flights with the Navy and the Coast Guard. Thank you guys for reconnaissance out there. We would we would be assigned through the UN. We'd be assigned a quadrant of the city. We would do a flyover, make some aerial reconnaissance assumptions, and then send ground teams out. The pictures, it's just basically everywhere you turn. I have been on missions, throughout the world, and to use Taiwan as an example, Taiwan, you would find several buildings in a particular part of town that had been damaged. But in this case, in Haiti, the whole city had been affected in one form or another. These were housing complexes, warehouses, factories. It really didn't matter what the purpose of the building was. The displaced citizens, what we used to call refugee camps, would be a walled compound. Basically, a school or a neighborhood would have a 8, 10, 12-foot high wall around it in many cases, with an open courtyard in the middle. What the folks would do is they would set up what little they had left, bring it in there, and set up their community, if you will, in this compound. It gave you security, it gave you a sense of boundary, and that would be their home for the foreseeable future. Okay. Again, you can see the debris. The debris had spilled out into the streets, and the people were just, pretty much looking for any place, any open area that they can find. What I was talking about before with the debris in the streets, you'd be driving down a narrow two-lane road. One lane would be blocked off with basically people taking squatters' rights in there. This is a picture that we found during one of our reconnaissance. We had received word that there were some voices heard in the rubble. We would take all of these leads, if you will. We'd take all these leads and check them all out. It wasn't like we took any of them and said, nah, we'd already been to that building. And in many cases, it resulted in researching the same building over and over again. But we would take this information seriously. This was a professional building. We found this photocopy in the rubble. The fact that it's a professional building gives us some clues. We knew what time the event had happened. We now know what kind of building it is. So that gives us some leads as to whether the building has got survivors in it. Would there be people in there? If you had a church, a building like this, for example, excluding the daycare center, if you had a building like this and it was a weekday, not likely to be occupied with a lot of people. However, on a Sunday morning, just the opposite. This would be one of my high target areas. This is going to be one of the places I'm going to hit first. So, like I said, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a professional office building in there. There's good likelihood that we're going to find some, the building will be occupied. Okay? This is the result of what we came up on. If you look closely at the sides of the concrete slabs there, you can see the lettering that appeared on the upper parts of the building there. Okay. A 10 or 12 foot tall floor, 12-foot story, is now compressed down to 18 to 24 inches. So what we're looking for there is basically any void spaces, any place the dog can get into, any place, we'll call out, we'll do call outs and listen for any kind of movement. We'll take the dogs around. If the dogs get a hit, we'll focus on that area. This process will take several hours. We did this every time with having multiple teams and multiple dogs. This was a school compound. Again, the same event. A little less concern here. It was a little later in the day, but we did get reports that there were some survivors in here. Went in, did the searches. This building offers a little bit more promise because you've got the void spaces. You've got a portion of the building that has not completely collapsed, and there's that potential that people can get in there. Of course, if you could get in there and walk around, chances are that if you were a survivor, you would have walked out of the building had you made it to that point. But again, you get to see the level of destruction here. This was this next series of slides was a rescue that we did in assisting the Martinique team. Teams arrived from all corners of the world, like I said, Iceland, Japan, China, Korea, Martinique. There were teams from the Dominican. Mexico had a team there. Chile had a team there, which is ironic because later on that month they would get an earthquake. But we received a request for some assistance from another team. This was the Martinique team. There's a woman in the corner there. Basically, the way these requests would come in is they wouldn't be very detailed. We'd get a request for some assistance. We'd go down there, we'd send our people. They would say, hey, we want to borrow some of your tools. Well, very good likelihood that they are not used to using the tools that we've got. In fact, and I'm not trying to talk badly about the folks from Martinique, but many of the even industrialized country teams were using hammers and chisels to break away concrete. So to have a electric chipping hammer there, not something that they may have been used to using. So what we would want to do is we'll give you the tool, we'll help you out, but it's got to go with one of our operators. Our people are going to help. Oh, no, then we don't want your help. That's kind of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So again, diplomacy, I'm not a big one for diplomacy. My idea of teamwork is everybody doing what I say. So the diplomacy thing really does work, though. You say, well, hey, let's do this. Let's have my guy go in there with you. You can use it a little bit, he'll use it, and you kind of trade off there a little bit. Well, and next thing you know, our guy will call in somebody else. Hey, I need one of my other guys in here to help with this. And next thing you know, we've got half a dozen of our people in there, and we're kind of making a little bit more elbow room. But the folks from Martinique brought some shoring equipment with them. The shoring equipment was instrumental in stabilizing the buildings. Typically, we use wood shoring. Because of its adaptability, we can use it pretty much at anything. But understand that Haiti is pretty much a deforested country. There's no wood to be found there. Talk about that more later on. But they had brought some steel pipe shores with them. We started setting those up. Another picture of that. Once the word got out that we had a victim, that we'd found a live victim, crowds would start to assemble. This is all word of mouth. It wasn't like a radio call went out or anything like that. But crowds would start to assemble. Always a little bit of concern. You couldn't let your guard down. Not that it was, yes, we did see acts of violence occur down there. It wasn't like they were widespread, but you couldn't let your guard down. You had to be, watch your back at all times. So we would often keep our rescuers out in the street to keep the people from coming up onto the rubble pile with us. Again, we're starting to use those shores there to stabilize the building, to keep the building from doing any more damage. This particular, the aquamarine colored building there, missing a critical column in the front. We didn't want that building to somehow collapse. The victim is right below and in front of the rescuer with a red helmet in there. So if that building were to collapse, obviously it would be a bad day for everybody there. So we started uncovering, we got in there with the tools. This is our victim in there. Basically what started off is just hearing a voice, hearing some tapping, hearing a voice. We got a hit with a dog. We didn't need the listening devices. We got enough, we were able to hear the noise. We got in there with a search camera, started to open it up a little bit more. And you can see there's actually 2 concrete slabs on top of her. We were able to open it enough that she was able to be removed and was rescued. This particular rescue took, I believe it was about 4 hours, although we had rescues that were shorter than that. We had rescues that were considerably longer. We had one rescue that occurred at the University of Port-au-Prince that lasted 27 hours. We actually rotated shifts through there. One of the decisions was made early on by the U.S. Embassy security staff that our team would not go out at night. We worked daytime shifts only. The exception to that was if we were in the midst of a rescue. We'd like to think that the embassy is going to shut down their operations and devote all of their efforts to what we're doing. Doesn't happen that way. There's still the embassy mission still has to take care of the other American citizens in country. So the security forces there deemed it that it was, we would not be working after hours. We were fortunate enough, and my hat's off to the U.S. Air Force parajumper squad that teamed up with us, happened to come along. If you know anything about parajumpers, they're kind of like urban search and rescue specialists. They've got the medical component, they've got the rescue. We're out at night, we're working around the clock, so they've got all the components that an urban search and rescue team has. Oh yeah, and they have guns too, so that gave us the security component. Those guys were fantastic. My hat's off to them, to everybody in the military service for their assistance out here. Okay. As the mission progressed, we were there for 2 weeks. As the mission progressed, and if you read the studies, you'll find that survivability in an earthquake starts to trail off after 5 to 7 days. It's just the physiology of the body, you can't survive that long. So our focus, although we kept several teams, several rescue squads ready and waiting to go out the door at a moment's notice, the other squads, to keep them active, and we kind of shifted our mission a little bit and started doing assessments. We started assessing critical infrastructure buildings, hospitals, schools, government centers, things like that. We wanted to try to, if there's anything we could do to restore that, that was a good thing. This is a hospital kitchen. Obviously, they can't serve food in a place like this, so we wanted to be able to bring in, they'd moved all of their operations to the courtyards, to the open areas. Fortunately, the weather this time of year was although hot, it was dry. We didn't experience any rain while we were there. But this is a big deal. Obviously, you can't just move your patients outside. There's concerns with that. So additional tents that we had brought with us, and subsequently when we left country, we left all of our tents there, along with our medical and communications cache. We would start setting these tents up and letting the hospital move in. Testimony to the resilience of the Haitian people, their ability to adapt was pretty incredible. This is a victim with a broken leg. The doctor has decided that traction is necessary, but the traction device that you'd normally expect in a hospital had been damaged. So they took a 5-gallon jug filled it with sand, and using that to apply traction to the victim. So here's the results of a lab. We relocated the lab function inside a tent. Basically keeps them going for a while. It's not the end all, but it certainly is a short-term fix. This is a project that I was personally involved in. This is the Hospital of Fatma. It is a 44-bed hospital over in the old military portion of the city, if you know anything about Haiti. It's a 44-bed hospital that was basically evacuated. They hadn't gone back in since the earthquake, and all of the functions of the hospital were outside. There was a courtyard where they were literally performing surgery in. It was a covered courtyard. We were given the coordinates, and that's literally how it happened. It wasn't like we got a street address. We were given GPS coordinates. We went to that location. I did a structural assessment on the building, evaluated the complex, and said, hey, this building is really not in too bad a shape. If we can get back here in a day or so with some wood, start shoring this stuff up, we'd be in good shape. Now, remember I said, Haiti's a deforested country. Getting wood was not a simple task. But we went to the airport. The pallets that are used to ship equipment in are basically held up off the bottom of the plane with 2x4s. We took those 2x4s, as many as we could find, basically tore them apart down to just bare 2x4s and rebuilt them up as posts, beams, and things like that, and we're able to build a rather robust shoring system for the hospital. As a result, with a little bit of minor structural repair, we were able to reopen that 44-bed hospital. I will tell you that rescuing somebody, you just don't quite feel the same after that. Quite a feeling of accomplishment. But to reopen, knowing that your actions resulted in reopening a hospital, makes you feel almost as good. So they were swabbing the floors before we left, cleaning the floors of the operating room. I walked through with the staff, the facilities management staff. They had concerns about the operating room. There were cracks in the wall. I assured them the cracks in the wall were cosmetic, not something structural. They were able to start moving their operations back inside the building there. So. Hotel Montana probably got a lot of coverage in the media. There were several rescues made early on. The Hotel Montana was a resort style, a very, very beautiful 5-story hotel up on top of the mountain. It was completely devastated. It got a lot of media coverage because of the concern that there were a lot of Americans there. That was part of the issue. We made some rescues early on, but because of that media coverage, Virginia Task Force 1 wound up making continuous presence on site for several days, from the 19th up through the day before we left, the 25th. where we implemented a delayering plan. We turned the plan over to the U.S. Corps of Engineers, the Army Corps of Engineers, and they took it over from there. But there's a picture of some of the features of the hotel beforehand. Here's a Google Earth shot of it about a year, 10 months prior to the earthquake, and then several days following the earthquake. Basically, the entire 5-story building toppled over towards the front turnaround circle, front drop-off area. 5 stories just kind of rolled over into that. This is part of the delayering operation we got with the backhoe operator. Started removing layers of concrete. As the concrete would be removed, it would open up void spaces. We'd send the dogs in to search those void spaces and see what we can find. But as we discovered after about 5 to 7 days, we weren't getting any hits from the dogs. We got quite a few hits. For those of you that are involved in canine, you'll know the difference here, but canine, there's live search dogs and then there are cadaver dogs. Some search teams use cadaver dogs, or police organizations will use cadaver dogs to search for human remains. Well, a lot of times we'd get a hit, we would get the word that a search dog got a hit, would be what we found out. So we'd send some people over there, we'd send a camera over there, only to find out that it was a cadaver dog that got a hit. So we go, yeah, no surprise. So, more of the delayering operation, again, as you take that layer of concrete off, there's void spaces in there. Those void spaces would have to be searched so that we were absolutely sure. This is the Cafe Comet, as it was actually called. I found a stained glass sign that said this. It was an outdoor happy hour bar there. Kind of looks like the front of the Starship Enterprise there. Absolutely beautiful view from the top of this place. But one of the concerns is that we were working and I'll show here on the right-hand screen, we were working in this area down below here. Just beyond the picture, there's a 4-story drop-off. How that building stayed intact and didn't literally slough down the mountain, I'll never know, but there were considerable concerns. This structure here, this round structure, was unstable. We had seen structural cracks in the concrete, and we were doing operations below that, so we wanted to make sure that if anything were to happen, we weren't going to be the first to, we wanted to be the first to find out about it. So this is one of the monitoring stations again. We set up a series of these. Basically, it's a plumb bob, one of the jobs that our structural specialists do. It's a plumb bob that will monitor any movement on the X or Y axis or vertically. If the plumb bob gets closer to the ground, we know something has happened there, and this gets monitored throughout the day. We'll set up a couple of these. The other way we can do this is to use a surveyor's transit, a theodolite, and mark points on the building and do those measurements. But this is keeping it simple here. So, the outcome, all in all, there were 67 teams in Haiti, over 130 rescues by over 1,900 people. Our team alone, Virginia Task Force 1, deployed 2 teams simultaneously. We had never done that before. We talked about it on paper, but never actually done it. 114 people. We had 16 rescues, 9 of which were unassisted, 7 which were assisted. So it was definitely a great outcome. We had some great lessons learned from this, and this is probably the best part of in my opinion, the best part of the presentation. Brad talked about it earlier in the communications thing. Technology is a great asset, and text messages and email messages are great, but you got to understand how the system works. When the cell site goes down, okay, it receives these text messages, but it doesn't send anything out. So once that cell site goes back up again, all the messages that were in the queue now get sent out. We had set up an email as a part of our normal operations. We set up an email address that people can send us information. It's a one-way. We did this primarily as an esprit de corps thing, something that our family and friends could send us words of encouragement, keep us going. The word got out what that website was, and we would receive email messages that, my friend so-and-so or my brother or my sister, I just got a text message from them, and there'd be the timestamp on it. I just got a text message from them. They're at this location. They're alive. So we would assemble a team. We'd send them out and go look for this. But what the problem was is that the cell site just powered back up again. So what it's doing is it's sending a message that was 4 or 5 days old back out. So we were chasing these ghosts, if you will, during the entire mission. So it's great technology, but you got to understand its limitations. Obviously, it's not the United States. Everything is different. The language is different. The customs are different. All of this is different, and you just have to keep that in the back of your mind. Diplomacy is the key. Like I said, I would have loved to have gone into some of these scenarios and just said, nope, it's the United States. We're here. We're in charge. Move on out. But you can't do it that way. The other thing we learned was that the logistical issues, it's not like calling for a backup. Those of you in here from the fire service, if you need another engine company, you just call for it, depending on how far it's coming, 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes away, but you got another backup coming. If we needed something, the equipment, the travel times, we were sharing vehicles with the embassy motor pool, so we didn't have our own vehicles there. You're looking at a 3 to 4 hour lead time. So we basically operated with what we had. Could we have done more if we had all of our vehicles? Perhaps, but in situations like that, you start reverting back to the basics. You start reverting back to your basic levering techniques, using basic tools to get the job done. So those were the lessons learned. Lessons reinforced. Training. Ironically, just a couple months prior, we had conducted, as we have to do every year, a mobilization exercise. We conducted an international earthquake response exercise in November 2009. That response was complete with a border crossing, with a plane loading exercise where we had to take all of our equipment, load it up at an Air Force base, and then go out, work multiple sites from a single base of operations. And a lot of those lessons that we experienced in November, we used again in January. So, and then Brad stole my thunder here. My good friend Paul Berdovich with FEMA in Washington is the exercise facilitator for this event, but the NLE 2011, the New Madrid Fault Exercise, if you've got interest in that, please contact your local emergency manager. But Paul is a member of Virginia Task Force 1 also. He's a safety officer on it, and he is one of the facilitators for that exercise. So, any questions? Well, hope you enjoyed the presentation. It was quite a mission. It was something that I will always be able to tell my children. I've never served time in the military, but this is my view of giving something back to my country. So, thank you very much. Appreciate it.